Hello, my fellow A-pushers, and welcome back. Today's lesson is on the causes of the American Revolution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you a little bit about the different causes that led to the American Revolution, and then I have two questions at the end. If you upload any one of those questions onto Flipgrid, you will earn an extra point onto your AP exam. So what I want to do is I want to start a bit talking about why there was what the causes of the American Revolution were. There is not just one single thing that caused the American Revolution, but rather a multitude of different things that did. And it's going to start all the way back into the French and Indian War. Uh, the French and Indian War is the start of period three, which is going to show this great war for empire. It's the 7 Years' War. This war really put Britain on the map as the dominating power in the world. But at the exact same time, this war also destroyed the British Empire in many different ways. And so that's what I want to talk about. Today, what we're going to look at is what happened from the French and Indian War all the way up into the Declaration of Independence. And these events that occurred led to our independence. It is not going to be one singular event that's going to lead it, but a multitude of different things that is going to happen. With every war, there's not just one cause. There is multiple things, and this is another example of it. When we talk about the French and Indian War, one of the things that we have to look at is mercantilism. And we talked about before that mercantilism is this idea that the mother country is there only to make money. The colonies are only there to make money for the mother country. And in order to do that, the British decided that the colonies were very profitable. There were a lot of raw materials here in the colonies, such as tobacco. By 1800, it's going to be cotton, indigo, rice. There's numerous things that they could trade with. So what the colonies decided to do was they were trading with Britain, France, Spain, anyone they could make money with. The British decided, no, you're only going to trade with one person and one person only. That's us. Now, the Navigation Acts had the positives and the negatives to it. One of the positives of Navigation Acts was anything that the colonists were trading with Britain was protected by the British Royal Navy. That means there wasn't impressment, there wasn't seizure of goods. One of the other things is Britain also paid the colonies to make a number of boats. Shipbuilding occurred during this time period. But there were some negatives to the Navigation Acts. You could only trade with Britain. So if Britain said we only want 1 million pounds of tobacco this year, that's all that they bought. They also determined the price of the goods as well, too. So the competition against other colonies actually hurt the American colonists. And what we're going to see is that the American colonists are going to really resent these Navigation Acts. And it's going to be one of the things that is going to start to break the colonists apart from the British at this time. So the end of the French and Indian War was a turning point in 1763, and this becomes a major turning point in the relationship between the colonies and the British at this time. We're going to see that the British had only owned a little bit of land in 1750 prior to the French and Indian War, but after the French and Indian War is over, their expansion is going to just blossom into it. There are some battles early on, nothing you really need to know per se about the French and Indian War. But one of the things that we did try to do is we tried to unite the colonies together early on. Benjamin Franklin saw an opportunity to unite the colonies together with the Native Americans. He was afraid of the Native Americans attacking, especially on the Western Front, and especially up in the Iroquois Confederation in New York. Although the Albany Congress did fail, one of the things it did do was it finally got some representatives together amongst the states. Of course, the very famous flag join or die, which becomes a rally cry later on in many of the other wars, was brought apart and drawn by Benjamin Franklin at this time. So war is officially declared, and what ends up happening is the British and the colonists are going to have some tensions together. The colonists are forced to join the British in this war, even though they really don't want to. They don't have any resentment against the French. They don't like the Indians, but they don't have any resentment against the French. And so they are brought into this war simply because they were owned by the British at this time. Now, one of the biggest problems was this guy named William Pitt. One of the things that he understood was he understood the colonists. He said, hey, listen, guys, don't worry. Britain will pay for it. We promise you whatever it costs, we will pay for it. And all of a sudden, Colonists are like, all right, let's go fight. Let's go fight with this guy. Of course, we understand later on, Britain doesn't pay for it. The colonists do. So the war is over in 1763, and we're going to see France lose a lot of its territory in here. They're going to lose the lands east of the Mississippi. Spain's going to join late in the war, and they're going to lose as well, too. They're going to lose Florida, England, and England is going to make out like a king's ransom. England, this is what North America looked like before the war. This is what North America looked like after the war. You're going to see the British Empire expand so rapidly. They're going to gain lands in India. They're going to gain lands in Florida, in Canada, you name it. The problem is you have to govern all that land. And to govern all that land, you need money. Money, which the British did not have. One of the things about this war is this war made the British Empire the most dominating empire the world has ever seen to this point. This empire had land in every continent. The problem with this war, it bankrupted the British. And that is going to be a problem when we start looking at the causes of the war. Okay, so the British are going to go into extreme debt. And what they're going to do is it's going to also look at a few other things as well, too. For the colonists, this French and Indian War was an ability for them to start fighting. And one of the biggest things that it ever did was it unified them. It unified the colonies against the British, against a common enemy. So once these colonies that had once been separated because of different religions or foundations, whether they were royal or proprietary colonies, they now finally came together. People from Georgia and Massachusetts started mingling together and started realizing we have a lot of things in common. Maybe we could form a bond. Maybe we could form a country together. And these things are going to start to be the downfall of the British Empire. Although the British needed the colonists to fight in this war, and although the British were excited that the colonists fought in this war, it actually was their downfall for it all. Okay? And so it created a lot of bitter feelings towards the colonies. This was just another war. Britain versus France has been happening for hundreds of years, but it's the first time that it was on New World soil. And this is the first, and because it came all the way over here versus staying in Europe, it became extremely expensive. Okay. So some of the aftermath of this war. Well, one of the things that happens is the colonists want to keep moving west. They keep wanting to move in west, but the Indians are going to keep fighting the colonists. And Pontiac's rebellion is going to lead to a bloodshed against the American colonists. And the American colonists turn around and say, hey, Britain, aren't you going to help us? And Britain decides to say no. So what Britain's going to do is they're going to say no colonists are allowed to go west of the Appalachian Mountains. Even though most of the fighting had happened in the Ohio River Valley, even though most of the fighting happened in this central area here, the colonists knew it was good farmland. They knew there was free, abundant amount of land out there. They were not allowed to go west of that Appalachian Mountains. They were not allowed to go west of the Proclamation line. So the British turned around and said, we can't defend you over there. We don't want you starting wars with the Indians, so you're not allowed to come west. That's just one of the multitude of different things that the British are going to make in mistakes over the next 10 years that are going to allow the colonists to break away. Okay. And so they're going to start to rethink their empire. So what ends up happening on the eve of the revolution? Well, we're going to look at the Revolutionary War right beforehand. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the multitude of different steps that happened to this revolution. Again, not just one thing started this war. Many, many things started this war. Okay, we're going to see there's a huge population growth in the late 1700s. Almost 2.5 million people were living here in the colonies prior to the breakaway of the Revolutionary War. That is a huge amount of people. And most of those people that lived here in the colonies were natural born here in the colonies. They didn't come from England. They were born here in America. They lived in America. They knew nothing about England rather than it was some other country halfway around the world. We're also going to see the settlement of the colonies be much different. Although the colonies are owned by British the British, it is not just the British that make up the backgrounds of the colonies. It's African slaves, it's the Dutch, it's the German, it's the Irish, it's the Scottish. It is multitude of different groups of people that are mingling here in the colonies. And it worked. It worked. You had different languages, different customs, different religions mixing here in this new world, and it worked, which is one of the great things about America today. You look at it, it was a mixture of English, Scottish, French, Irish, Dutch, and Germans. Cracora goes in and talks about, you could have multiple wives, you could have wives of different of races and grandfathers, but it all worked here in America. Okay. You can also look at American wealth. Our wealth prior to the revolution was pretty well. We had silver makers. Our guys were fat like me. And all of a sudden you got a few extra pounds on you. That means you were a little bit wealthy. We looked at the colonists already go through. So one of the problems about the French and Indian War was prior to the French and Indian War, the British gave us what was called salutary neglect, which meant we did our own thing. They left us alone. They made money. Everybody was happy. The colonists were able to do whatever they wanted. The British didn't really regulate it. As long as the money was coming in, they were happy. But when the war changes, when the war is over, that is when the British are going to come over here and say, whoa, 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 these colonists are rich. These colonists are fat. These colonists got everything they want. Let's start taxing them. And so that's exactly what they begin to do, okay? And so it is not just one tax, but a series of taxes. The war is over, but the British still refused to remove the troops from North America. What they decided to do was they decided to keep British troops here in the colonies, and they called it the Quartering Act. Because the British couldn't afford to pay for forts, you had to house a soldier in your house. That soldier could be eating your food, sleeping in your bed, whatever it is. But there was no war. Why are you having British soldiers staying here in America when there is no war? If there's a war going on, I understand that, but there was no war. And so what the Quartering Act is going to do is it's actually going to later inspire the Third Amendment. Although I don't really recall any time this has ever been used, but soldiers cannot stay in your house at a time of peace without your consent. Today that hasn't been. We have military bases, we have things that go in. It doesn't work that way. There was a numerous amounts of taxes, but the tax that the British got wrong in the first place was called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is the start of a multitude of different taxes that get imposed onto the colonies. There were other taxes before this, like the Sugar Act and Molasses Act and Wool Act, but those taxes were on the business. This is the first tax on the consumer. And what this did was, this was a direct slap in the face. Less than 2 years after the war was over, and the British said, we're going to pay for the war, they then imposed the Stamp Act. Now, it's not so much that the British imposed the Stamp Act that caused problems, but it was the reaction that what happened afterwards. One of the things of the battle cry was taxation without representation. And these three words are going to be the catalyst for the American independence movement. What ends up happening is the British turn around and say to the colonists, you are British citizens. You have to pay taxes. That's fine. The colonists didn't mind that. But then they said, if we're British citizens, then you need to give us representation in Parliament. And we need to have a say in Parliament on the taxes that are going through. Well, the British weren't going to give up their parliamental powers, especially to some rebel-rousing colonists. So what they said is, we virtually represent you. That's what angered the colonists. If the British would have given the colonists representation in Parliament, if the British would have given the colonists a chance in Parliament to really have a voice, I think the colonists would have paid the taxes. I think this would not have blown out to a war. So what ends up happening? Well, we form what's called the Stamp Act Congress. We go through and we unite together in the colonies, but also we formed two very terrorist groups called the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, which they did where you see they for the taxpayers, for tax collectors, they poisoned them. They threatened them with nooses. They tarred and feathered them. If you want to watch the video again from John Adams, go ahead. It is some gruesome stuff to see what they did to these tax collectors. The tax collector was just doing his job, but it was the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, people like Patrick Henry, people like Samuel Adams that just became rebel rousers that really took this to the extreme. One of the things that we did do was, as colonists, we decided to stop paying these taxes, and so we stopped buying things. And Parliament overturned the Stamp Act and put in a more harsher Townshend Acts, which now means you can search your house without a warrant. That is later going to lead into the Fourth Amendment. People are going to write letters. John Dickinson's Letters from Pennsylvania Farmers is one of your weekly assignments, one of your sources. Read through that. This is a farmer who was upset at the taxes. It wasn't a businessman who was upset. It wasn't a city man, but rather a farmer later on. John Dickinson's going to be later famous for moving to Delaware, becoming a representative of Delaware, and being the writer and author of the Articles of Confederation. Later events also occur, like the Boston Massacre, which we talked about before, where the British opened fire and killed 5 soldiers. This is the view from Paul Revere, but this is the view from John Adams. Who was to blame? Well, that's in history to go through. But we did send people over. We warned people together about the British and the problems that the British had. And then probably one of the events that really angered the colonists was when the Tea Act was passed. The Tea Act allowed for a monopoly on the British East India Company. That monopoly actually lowered the price of tea. It actually made tea cheaper for the colonists, but they saw tax, they saw monopoly, and they went wild. They dumped over $2 million at that time of tea into the British harbor, which only angered the king even further. And so the king is going to pass his most important acts that are going to really break the ties of the British. He calls them the coercive acts. Here in the colonies, we call them simply the intolerable acts. And these acts punished British. It punished the Boston. It closed their ports. It appointed their governors. It put more soldiers into houses. It made it a very restrictive type of place to live. This is colonies that had seen independence, had grown up in independence movements, and all of a sudden this independence is starting to slowly be taken away from them. One of the other things that angered the colonists was Quebec, which is a Canadian province. They were allowed to have complete autonomy. They were allowed to do whatever they wanted. So here, somebody just slightly up to the north was allowed to do whatever they wanted, but the colonies, the 13 colonies, were not allowed. They saw this as completely unfair. One of the other things that was kind of going on at the same time, this happens in the late 1600s, but it comes into the 1700s here in America, and this is the Enlightenment period. This is periods of natural laws and natural rights started by John Locke, saying everyone has life, liberty, and property. Jefferson's going to change that to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We talked about the different philosophies and quotes and so on. And then it leads to common senses. These are times that try men's souls, right? This is Common Sense. This is Thomas Paine. This is the book that inspired the American Revolution for the most part. Was it inedible? Well, that's the big question that comes through. Were the colonists right in breaking away? Were the colonists justified in breaking away from the British? The colonists were under 150 years of rule under the British rule. And all of a sudden, within 10 years, they're itching for independence. What started these movements? So there's a number of continental congresses that come along. One of the things they try to do is they reach out to the king and say, listen, we want to work with you, king. We want to help you with these taxes. We want a voice. And the king shot them down. And so what ends up happening is by 1776, the tide is done. We've offered the king every explanation. We tried everything. But by 1776, we are going to break away. And so the question I'm going to ask you guys today to send back to me is one of two questions. Question number one, we were under rule by the British for over 150 years. Were the American colonists justified in breaking away? That's question number one. Question number two, What event or what idea do you think really caused the American Revolution to start? What was the event that was the breaking point? And why was that event the breaking point that led to our independence? Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the American Revolution and talk about how that American Revolution changed our colonies. So I hope everybody's having a wonderful and safe day. Again, if you do these videos and you upload these videos if you upload these videos onto Schoology, I'm sorry, onto Flipgrade, you will earn extra credit points for doing so. So again, please be safe, everybody. Earn these extra credits. Use the vocabulary each day. There is vocabulary that's tied. I would have a list of all my vocabulary words on a piece of paper. Write all those vocabulary words down. Title it Causes of the American Revolution. If you get a DBQ on the Causes of the American Revolution, you flip right to that page and all your background knowledge is right there. If you put the time and effort in now, I guarantee you, you will get a 5 on this AP test, okay? I promise you guys you'll do it. If you need help with anything, I'm an email away. I'm a text away. If you need the conference, let me know. Again, if you need a laptop, I need to know this week if you need a laptop. So send it back to me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, everybody have a wonderful day. Peace out. I enjoy you guys. Thanks for listening.